Alright, this time I'd like to ramble a little bit about realism in games. And I took Fistful of Frags as an example, just because it's one of the games I've been playing recently, but more importantly because it illustrates some of the points rather well. Even though it's an action-oriented shooter, not a simulator by any means, it's pretty realistic in many ways. You have to, of course, think what realism means. It's easy to fall into the whole thing of, well, it's a video game, of course it's not supposed to be realistic. But many games are, in fact, supposed to be realistic. They claim to be, and they base some of the enjoyment of the gameplay on realism to an extent. And this is a good example of that, because Fistful of Frags is different from most other shooters in that the reloading takes much longer. And you have to be more tactical about it. You know, the decision of when to reload. And also, you can't just do Call of Duty nonsense, just jumping around, spinning, and just shooting everybody across the map in ridiculous ways. When you move, your accuracy plummets enormously. So you can't just be running and jumping and still accurately shooting. You basically have to stand still in order to actually hit your target, unless you're extremely close. And that is perfectly realistic, and in this case, the realism actually adds to the gameplay. It's meaningful for how it plays and how you enjoy the game. So what is realism? I'm not going to bore you with a dictionary definition of the word realism. I'm just going to talk about the way I understand it, applied to video games. So realism does not mean necessarily a 100% accurate representation of reality. That's not even possible in a video game. You cannot get 100% exactly like reality. It would probably also be pretty boring if that were the case. But you can follow certain rules, I suppose, that also apply to reality. Like, for example, a simulation of gravity, which is in place here. Things fall down. It may seem silly, but that's one of the most basic elements of realism. I mean, you're controlling humanoid characters that run around, they're affected by gravity to varying degrees, and they fire weapons. They hurt each other, they kill each other. Those are, to an extent, accurate representations of reality. The fact that they just respawn and the fact that they can use whiskey to heal themselves, yeah, okay, that's not particularly close to reality, of course. But it's not an all or nothing type deal, the way some people seem to see it. It's a matter of degree. With the whiskey, for example, it does have a certain basis behind it. Alcohol as a painkiller. So you take some alcohol to deal with the pain. So you're able to function for a while longer until you can get medical attention, hopefully. Even if that just means cutting the wound open and plunging pliers into it and pulling the bullet out, then cauterizing it with hot iron or something. Yeah. So there is some basis to it. It's not completely arbitrary. The way some games do magic is pretty freaking arbitrary. It's basically, oh, you just wish for an effect and there it is. That kind of thing. You just have that was a pretty funny double kill. You just have, energy balls shooting from your hands just because, yeah, whatever, it's magic. Or this oversized sword that nobody could possibly use in real life. Oh well, it's magic. That's fine. Even magic can be somewhat realistic, in my opinion, or at least logical. For example, the way Brandon Sanderson describes magic. In his books, he actually explains how the magic works, instead of just saying, well, it's magic as a generic placeholder explanation for everything. For example, he doesn't just say people fly magically, but he describes how they draw power from metals and use that to push off objects, similar to the way in which magnets with identical pole will repel each other. So that way magic is not just its own justification and its own explanation. It doesn't make magic any more plausible in real life, but it makes it more satisfying because that way you can understand it and you can anticipate effects. Of course, you don't have to care about it. A game doesn't need to be logical, obviously, but it's easier to relate to it if it has some degree of logic. Now, again, I'm not trying to say here that you need realism in order to be able to enjoy the game. Of course not. It can be completely, off the rocker, so to speak, like Super Mario, for instance. Even that has some degree of realism, if you will, because, well, there is gravity. It doesn't seem to be very strong, but it's there. And when you jump on something, you expect an effect, right? So he squashes the Goombas when he jumps on them, which is, yeah, okay. Something like that would happen in real life if you jumped on a smaller thing with your whole body weight. You would crush it, yes. So even there is an element of it, but of course it's not much. Again, it's degree, and yeah, this is getting terribly rambly, but I'm sure you get what I'm trying to say here. So a game like Mario or say Unreal Tournament, those are games that don't claim to represent anything accurately whatsoever. Something like this has an obvious historical setting. And that's why I think it's fair to comment on the realism of games like For Honor, for example, because they show Vikings, knights, and samurai, historical figures. But I also have to say, even though I like to make fun of how they cut through solid steel plate as if it were butter, it's, of course, again, a gameplay issue. If you portrayed knights realistically, it would require special tactics to deal with the armor. That would make it more difficult to fight those compared to, say, Vikings. In order to make the characters balanced, you have to take certain liberties, of course. Fistful of Frags definitely tries to give an accurate representation of history, to an extent. The weapons are actually quite well represented, but they discard realism when it's necessary to do so for gameplay balance. In this case, for example, when you reload the revolver, you'll see that the chambers are empty after the gun has been fired, which of course is unrealistic because you would have the empty brass left in there. So you would have to push the empty cases out first and then load, which would take extremely long. Like even by the standards of this game and for what it tries to achieve, the revolver would be very much poorly balanced compared to the other weapons because they reload much faster. So they had to skip that to make sure it's not completely unbalanced. So there shouldn't be realism just for its own sake. That would be pointless. And I think that's the way that a lot of people misunderstand videos where I talk about how realistic a certain weapon is. In a video game, they seem to, some get almost offended or fully offended, I guess. Because, oh, how dare you talk about this realism thing? It's not supposed to be, it's just a video game, shut up. Like they seem to think that if you talk about realism in games at all, that means that you want a 100% accurate depiction of reality. It has to be like virtual reality, everything the exact same. Which of course would mean that almost every game would be a walking simulator, which would be terribly boring. But, that's not the case, of course. In this case here with the Smith carbine, the reloading speed is pretty damn good, but I do think that someone who's well practiced could do that. In cowboy action shooting, you see people who are really damn fast. So with enough practice, you can actually do that. And there I actually thought I had gotten him, but nope, I didn't. Here the Colt Walker is a percussion revolver. And that, of course, takes a long time to reload. They did speed it up, and my accuracy there was glorious. So you see, he pushes, it must be a paper cartridge that he pushes into the chamber, and then he rams it down with the rammer. So the animation looks a little awkward, but It's the basic principle. Yeah, you have to push the powder and ball. In this case, as said, since he does it with one gesture, it must be a paper cartridge pre-rolled. So he shoves that into the chamber and then rams it down. What he skips is priming, putting the percussion caps on. But again, this is balance, because if you had to do that as well, then this would be the slowest gun to reload in the whole game, and it would be painfully, ridiculously slow to reload. They could have chosen to do this whole preloaded cylinder thing, so where he just grabs a spare cylinder and exchanges that. That would have made it very quick. That would have made it one of the quickest revolvers to reload. Also, a little weird to think that the character is then carrying like 25 spare cylinders or whatever, as they do have unlimited ammo, which of course is technically unrealistic, but at the same time, considering how long it usually takes until you die, or not so long really, it's not that outrageous, so to speak. They could carry quite a bit of ammo on their person, and so some things can be neglected. For example, headshots in the game are instantly fatal, generally. So you could say that, well, there have been cases in real life where people survived a headshot, and there have even been weird cases where a bullet ricocheted off a skull. It can happen. There is a small, but there is a chance that you can survive a headshot. Also depending on the caliber, of course. But it makes more sense to just say, well, it's fatal, because the chance of surviving it is so low, you might as well ignore it. I'm not sure if I make really good points here, but just felt like elaborating a little bit on that topic, and maybe it was entertaining. Regardless, thanks for watching.